So much to think about, so much to do. I am Penny Imison, and I welcome everybody here for our bonus Thursday talk. I am very excited about our program calendar this spring because it is hopping like the Easter Bunny. There is so much going on, I can't keep track of it all. But Andrea's created these nice little bookmarks that are available at the front desk. I know the website is full of information. I'm trying to make sure that all the events are getting loaded. The History Book Club is up there throughout the summer, and the coffee mills, that calendar is up. I will put a plug in for next Tuesday when Gary Smucker is coming to talk about the Tusing sisters, who had a very unique lifestyle, and he's going to concentrate on their weaving, I believe. That will be great. And then on the 17th, our third Thursday talk is Ken Rutherford speaking to landmines, the legacy of landmines in the Civil War. And that will be quite interesting. He's travels the world as to help with that particular, what would you call it? The legacy of the landmines that are still in our ground today. I am seeing some new faces, and I assume there's some online, and I just want to put a plug in for our memberships. This is a great way to just sort of be the foundation of our events and our programs and our research and our resources, everything that happens here at Rocktown History. We love our members because you really make it happen. But donors are always great too, and the Great Community Give is coming on Wednesday the 16th. So just put a little bookmark in your memory if you'd like to help participate. That is the community-wide giving day for Harrisonburg and Rockingham County nonprofits. So big impact on that day. Very exciting. Okay, let's get to it. We are happy to welcome Stephanie Gardner here today. She came when she wrote her first book, and it was a delightful presentation. It's just so fascinating to find out more about the stories behind the stories. So let me give her a quick introduction, and we'll get things started. Stephanie Gardner lives in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, not very far from us. She grew up in the mountains of western North Carolina and has strong family roots in the mountains of Southwest Virginia. She holds degrees in history, public history, and library science. Stephanie works as a librarian, archivist, and a museum curator at Bridgewater College. And this is her second book on Rattlesnake Granny. So let's find out more about those adventures. Thank you, Stephanie. Yes. Okay. Quick, a little.
All right. Well, okay. Okay. How about now? Okay. Testing. 1, 2, testing.
It's good soft.
Testing. I have a tiny voice too, and I'll try to speak louder as well. Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming out tonight to the presentation. Thank you to the people watching online. Thank you to Rocktown History for having an extra Thursday night presentation. I'm very excited to tell you about the people, places, and some of the things by 2 books about Rattlesnake Granny, and especially about the second book. I wrote 2 books. The first one came out last year at Valentine's Day, and the title of that one is Rattlesnake Granny, Nancy Remembers Life in War Thornton Gap, Inspired by True Stories. The book with the green cover is its sequel, It's Rattlesnake Granny Strikes Again, More Tales of the Blue Ridge Mountains and Shenandoah Valley. It came out just a couple of months ago. Being an author has been a lot of fun. I love doing the research and writing this historical fiction. The stories are about my fictionalized version of a real person. Her name was Nancy Pullum. I learned about Nancy Pullum through the papers of historian Dr. John W. Whalen, who I'll talk more about in a bit. Dr. Whalen learned about Nancy Pullum from Herbert Barbee, who I'll also tell you more about. And Herbert Barbee learned about, or knew Nancy Pullum from growing up. When he was a child, she would come and visit his father, William Randolph Barbee, in Thornton Gap. And they lived in Thornton Gap, and they would sit and smoke together. She smoked a pipe. And they were friends, even though they were quite different. So Herbert Barbee told Dr. John Whalen that this woman who he remembered growing up was very unattractive and even fierce looking and scary, but that she had a heart of gold. So this is an AI rendering there, somewhat like I imagine her. This woman was making her living by catching rattlesnakes. She would catch them with a wooden stick with a copper hoop on it. And then she would squeeze them in that copper noose and hang them up until they stopped wiggling, because she thought they would bite themselves if they knew that they had been caught and poison themselves. And then when they were dead, she would skin them, fry out the fat, and make it into a topical anti-inflammatory that she bottled that people could rub on their skin. And it was especially good, she said, for treating rheumatism or arthritis. Now, one question that I get pretty frequently is, was her medicine for real? Was it genuine, or was she a con artist and was it a sham? Because we know snake oil is not very reputable. It looked like John Whalen wondered about that too. And he wrote that she believed in herself and the people in the community believed in her medicine. And she lived up in a cabin on the mountains. So I'm sure people saw her catching snakes. So I think it's safe to assume that her snake oil was really snake oil. And I've heard that rattlesnake oil would have some omega-3 fatty acids in it maybe, and maybe would work okay as a topical anti-inflammatory, possibly. But later on in American history, people began marketing and selling patent medicine, snake oil, that did not contain rattlesnake oil, that contained harmful ingredients. The most famous of them was Clark Stanley, the Rattlesnake King. You can see a bottle of his patent snake oil liniment there. I read that at first his ointment or his liniment did contain rattlesnake oil, but later on he couldn't be bothered to catch rattlesnakes. So what was in it was no actual snake oil and some harmful ingredients. He was prosecuted by the federal government in some early Pure Food and Drug Act regulation. It took them until 1917 to shut down his operation, though. So he was a real snake oil salesman, definitely a charlatan. But before you begin to think that snake oil was always a sham or is always a sham, there's been studies done on the Chinese water snake. This is an AI depiction of a snake, not depicting the actual Chinese water snake. But this snake is said to be high in omega-3 fatty acids and would probably work well, the study said, as a topical anti-inflammatory. However, the medicine in this presentation and in the books are portrayed as folklore, so definitely don't take medical advice from the presentation or from the books. And also, if you are not a fan of snakes, you'll be happy to know that this is the last time a snake is depicted in this presentation. So here's a photograph of Dr. John Whalen. He lived from 1872 to 1962. His day books are in Bridgewater College Special Collections, where I work. And I'm sure everybody here knows of Dr. Whalen, a noted historian, author, and educator in the Valley, considered one of the most important of the Virginia historians. Everything that he did during a day, he would write down in these day books. He would write down what he bought, the chores he was doing, the weather. He also wrote historical field notes in his day books. In 1932, he wrote that he went to Thornton Gap, Virginia, with Herbert Barbee, who was living near Luray. And Herbert Barbee told Dr. John Whalen about his life growing up in Thornton Gap. Herbert Barbee was a teenager at the time of the Civil War. He told John Whalen about Nancy Pullum and other people that he remembered from his youth there in Thornton Gap. And John Whalen wrote it all down in his day books. He also drew a map, and that's where I learned Nancy Pullum's story and was very eager to tell it. As far as I know, Dr. John Whalen did not publish about Nancy Pullum. If he did, I'd like to hear about it, but I think it may just be in the day books. The story takes place in Thornton Gap, as we were saying, and this is the map that Dr. Whalen published in his book, Historic Homes of Northern Virginia and the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia. He drew this map based on the map that he drew in his day book when he went to Thornton Gap. There's some places here to take note of, and you can see up there on the far right is a little square that's Nancy Pullum's cabin. And so that is where she lived in relation to the other characters and places in the book. I also wondered if her name might have been Pulliam or Pulliam, because those seem like a more common name at the time for people in that area. But it's looking like he wrote down her name as Pullum, and that's how he wrote it in the day book as well. Below her house, or her cabin there, across the Thornton River, is the Bower. I'll tell you more about the Bower later on. And the Bower features in both books, and it was the home of Herbert Barbee and his parents and his brother and sisters. Up there near the top is a square indicating Uncle Bob's cabin. Uncle Bob is fictionalized in both books as a character named John. He was a freedman who was a real person living up there in the mountains. And then you can see the Hosberg house kind of there in the middle at the top. This was the Barbee family home that Herbert Barbee's father, William Randolph Barbee, grew up in with many brothers and sisters. Then you can see over on the left that they had a tannery. That features especially in the first book. And there's Mary's Rock there in the middle. One thing that I really like about this map is how Dr. Whalen took features of Herbert Barbee's memories and added them in, as well as some modern features as well, like the Mary's Rock Tunnel. Another question that people frequently ask about the books is, where is Thornton Gap? And Thornton Gap is at the border of Page and Rappahannock counties. It's one of the main entrances to Shenandoah National Park. This is a picture I took last year of the Thornton Gap entrance sign. Here's another picture that I took last year. Thornton Gap is a wind gap. one of the wind gaps going through the Shenandoah. It's a natural pass through the mountains. Native people traveled the gap for many years before the white settlers came in, and I believe they came in about the 1700s. Here's a picture from Shenandoah National Park Archives of Thornton Gap taken from near Mary's Rock. When these historical people lived in Thornton Gap, there was a lot of industry in the area. The Barbie family had a post office, a pottery, a stagecoach stop, a hotel there, but it also had some wild country, I would imagine, like where Nancy Pullum and the John character lived. So here's some rocks in the area before the trails went through, before the park was built. I like to imagine historic Nancy Pullum up there looking for rattlesnakes under those rocks. The story is about mountaineers. We talk in the books about mountaineers of Pennsylvania German and Scots-Irish ancestry. This is how I like to imagine Nancy's cabin. This is Corbin Cabin. It's not in the park. It's on the Blue Ridge Parkway, but kind of like I imagine her little cabin. And in addition to talking about the mountaineers of European descent, I also talk some about the Black and biracial or multiracial mountaineers. And there was slavery in Thornton Gap and in the Shenandoah Valley. This is the Virginia slave population map of 1860. And what you're seeing there is that as you go west, the tone there gets darker, indicating that there's a higher population of enslaved African Americans laboring in those areas. Thornton Gap is kind of in the area there where the color begins to darken, showing an indicated percentage of enslaved people in the area. And some of the historic characters that you will learn about today or read about in the book were connected with this slavery system. The man who I told you about, who's called John in the book, who was called Uncle Bob in the primary sources, was a man who was enslaved by William Randolph Barbie's father, Andrew Russell Barbie. So he was Herbert Barbie's grandfather's slave or enslaved laborer. And this man, he grew quite old, he grew older, and he was infirm. He had arthritis. So Herbert Barbie told John Whalen that he remembered this man walking with 2 canes everywhere he went, and that he remembered, he always knew where he was because he could see his tracks in the snow. It snowed up there in Thornton Gap. But Herbert Barbie told John Whalen that as this man grew older and more infirm with arthritis, that he would ask Andrew Russell Barbie to give him his freedom and give him some land up there on the mountain that he could live by himself. And he would tell Andrew Russell Barbie that he wasn't of use to him anymore in his condition. And Andrew Russell Barbie would say no. But this man kept persisting and saying that he could do it. And Andrew Russell Barbie said, no, you're going to starve up there on your own. You can't live alone up there on the mountain. And the man said he could. And eventually, the Barbie family did free him. I don't know if it was a formal emancipation, but they did send him up there and give him some land on the mountain, as you saw on the map with Uncle Bob's cabin. Herbert Barbie told John Whalen that this man did very well as far as gardening. He was a very good gardener. John Whalen saw some fruit trees that he planted when he visited Thornton Gap. In the books, I take the fictional version a little bit farther and have him being a commercial gardener. So he's going into town selling his fruits and vegetables and flowers. And he bought our made a wagon that he is taking his vegetables into town to sell. And the fictional Nancy likes to ride into town with this fictional John in the books. But in the second book, when Nancy has a batch of snake oil made and wants to go into town, John is nowhere to be found. And that keeps happening. So she wants to get into town, so she buys a mule to get around on in the second book. Another African-American mountaineer who I talk about in the book is a woman named Bethany Veeney. Have you all heard of Bethany Veeney? Okay. There's been some work done on her lately and some work with her descendants that's been very interesting. Bethany Veeney, she was born as an enslaved person up in Thornton Gap, in that area, in the Luray area. I don't know if it was actually in Thornton Gap, but in that area. And as she was a slave from a child, at one time she was enslaved to a blacksmith who treated her very cruelly. At one time she was enslaved to a man who she called David McCoy. And that name sounded very familiar to me because Herbert Barbee's mother, Mary Jane McKay Barbee, her father was named David McKay, which sounds a lot like David McCoy. So I wonder, but I don't know, if the historic Bethany Veeney was enslaved by the historic Mary Jane Barbee's father. So I'm still learning about this. A way that we know about Bethany Veeney is she published an autobiography. She told her story to a woman who was a white abolitionist, and she wrote it as a book, and the book is Aunt Betty's Story. The book is probably using a lot of the language that this person who she told her story to was using, and not Mrs. Veeney's own language. Although I've seen some of her letters, and it was very interesting to give more of her voice. But it does tell her story and what it was like for her being enslaved in that area where this story takes place. At one point, she was working for this Mr. McCoy as a cook for the men who were working on the roads in Thornton Gap, the African-American men. And she writes about that as well and how she found hope. She was eventually purchased by someone who moved her north to freedom, but her family was still in the South, and she came back for them after the Civil War and confronted some of her enslavers as well when she would return after the Civil War. So very inspiring story, and a person I was honored to write about and to learn about. Here's some about the Barbee family. I've been talking about Herbert Barbee, who was the source of these stories about life in Thornton Gap around the time of the Civil War. Herbert Barbee was a stone carver. And here you see he's working on a bas relief of Stonewall Jackson, which I am guessing is probably the relief that's in the middle, in the pediment there, or in the middle there, of the Confederate Veterans Memorial in Luray, or the first Confederate Veterans Memorial in Luray. After I began giving the talk for the first book and talking about the Barbee family, I found that a lot of people knew about the Confederate Veterans Monument and how the people of Luray did not like it. And apparently there were Confederate veterans camping near the monument when it was dedicated, picnicking in reunion, and they did not visit the monument. Luray now has 2 Confederate Veterans Monuments because they raised money to build another one because people didn't like this one. And has anybody heard these stories? I've heard different reasons why they didn't like it. Herbert Barbee said he based the soldier on the monument on a man who he saw standing picket at Mary's Rock and Thornton Gap during the Civil War. Some of the reasons that I've heard that people didn't like this monument, some people said the soldier looked too ragged. Some people said that he looked too crisp and clean. Some people said that he looked like Herbert Barbie, and they thought Herbert Barbie was modeling him after himself. And some people didn't like Herbert Barbie, and I've heard this from a few places, that people thought that he was eccentric and snobby. Some people did, anyway. So as you can tell, if he's making this monument, and it says there at the shrine, I believe, summer of 1898, when it was new, that he was involved in the lost cause mentality, and he was a big supporter of the Confederacy. He also carved some other government pieces and some other artistic bas reliefs as well. And he has a Bridgewater connection. He lived in Bridgewater for a time because his uncle, his father's brother, Colonel Gabriel T. Barbie, lived at the house that is now the Cracked Pillar Pub. He was running it as a hotel. It was their private home. And Colonel Barbie's daughters had a girls' school there. And the historical record shows that Herbert Barbie went there to learn from his uncle when he was a young man. The Barbie family was a big, big family. One person who features, especially in the first book, is William Randolph Barbie. He was Herbert Barbie's father. He lived from 1818 to 1868. He was also a stone carver, a marble sculptor, and ever since he was a little boy, he loved to carve. He would carve everything around him if he could. And the word that the family used at the time was feeble-minded, and they thought he was feeble-minded doing all this carving. But eventually they figured out that he had some real talent. And he did have some art training in Virginia, but mostly he studied law. He studied law so he could practice law, not because he enjoyed being an attorney or because he loved the law, but because he wanted to make money. And when he had made enough money practicing law in Luray, he took his family, his wife Mary Jane Barbie, and the boys Herbert and Clifford, I don't think the girls were born yet, and went to Italy, Florence, Italy, where he studied stone carving from the masters there. He made some pieces that were quite well known. He made a piece called the Coquette, and he carved a figure, Fisher Girl. And as you can imagine, these were young ladies, young female nudes. I've heard anecdotally that some people in the area did not like that, including his own mother, that he was carving these nudes. But he did other art as well. He was carving for the government in the Capitol building, in a studio right in the Capitol building, when the Civil War broke out. The story is that he had to flee, and the man who was supposed to be his assistant took all his tools, all his finished art and unfinished art, and stole them and sold them around the country. And it took a while for them to find all of his art that this man had stolen. He went back to Thornton Gap, and he kind of fell on I think he felt like he fell on hard times after that with his art being stolen, and he became ill as well. Oh, and I also think he was probably a major enslaver. I'm always telling the students at the college that I work with to cite your sources. You don't want to find something and not know where it's from. And that's exactly what I did with a statistic that I read about him being the largest enslaver in the area, I think. So I'm not going to say that I read that as a historical fact, because I can't find where it came from. But I do know that the Barbie family were major enslavers, as well as Mary Jane McKay's family. The McKay family were also major enslavers in the area. Mary Jane McKay was Herbert Barbie's mother, and she lived from 1830 to 1908. I've heard that there is a picture of her in the museum at Luray Caverns, which I haven't seen. Has anybody seen it? I definitely want to go see it, because they told me that she stands out She looks like a Southern belle, I guess you would say. She would fit the Southern belle stereotype. And I like to imagine her in this fictional historical fiction version as having a little bit of an adjustment between growing up in the town of Luray and then coming to live in Thornton Gap there, where it's more wild. So I have some daffodils there to represent her, because in the first book she plants daffodils around the bower house to pretty it up. And there's a picture of the bower where the Barbie family lived. As you can see, it was built by Frank Skinner in 1775, and they called it Skinner's Bower. And then later they called it Barbie's Bower. The last residents were removed from it to build Shenandoah National Park. Today it's in ruins, and I've seen some very interesting photos and a video online where people went and looked at the ruins of it. There's still some rock walls standing. There's a metal roof. I've heard that there were slave quarters attached to it as well. I don't know if it was burned as part of resettlement of people off the land to build the national park or not. There's a fictional character in the second book who was a lot of fun to write about. Her name is Temperance, but she goes by Tempe in the book. And this fictional character is a fashionable teenager who gets sent to live with Nancy Pullum in Thornton Gap one summer so that her parents can take off in their Rockingham County buggy, like the one in the museum that I noticed earlier, and go and have fun. So they're dropping her off to live with Nancy. And as you can imagine, neither one of them are happy at first about this arrangement. But that's an AI rendering of how I imagine that Tempe would have looked, helping to bottle the snake oil. And there is a real photograph of a girl about that age who was a fashionable teenager around the 1870s or 1880s. In the first book, there's a lot of information about the lifeways of the area and some about the geography and the nature in the area that the story is set. In this book, I talk more about the industry of the area, although there's still some lifeways information as well. But one of the places that Nancy and Tempe visit in the book is the mill in Thornton Gap. And Thornton Gap did have an old grist mill. I read that it could grind a barrel full of flour an hour. And of course, mills were very important. This one was started out being powered by the Thornton River. And there was also a sawmill and a blacksmith shop there. And this is a photo from the mill, one of the mills here in our area. Very important to the local economy. This is a furnace stack remnant in Floyd, Virginia. And this is how the title of the presentation came about with the pots and pans, because the book has a story about a man named Daniel Scheler. He probably went by Schuler because he was German. He's anachronistic. He fought in the Revolutionary War, and he was also in Southwest Virginia. But his story is so fun that I wanted to include it in the book. Also, he's a distant great-grandparent. The story of Mr. Scheler is that he settled in the area near Floyd, Virginia, and was going to start smelting iron. So he built this gigantic cold blast furnace. And this, you see from the National Register nomination, probably a later furnace on the property, I think. Maybe not his original, although it could be. I'm not sure if they were sure. But when he had smelted his first pots and pans and took them into Lynchburg to sell, they did not sell well. And he must have had a temper. And I'm sure he was thinking about how he was going to feed his children, all the labor he put into building this furnace stack and digging the iron ore and smelting the iron ore. And now people weren't going to buy his pots and pans. So he started throwing them around. And he threw them there in the street. And people, when they began to see him doing this, they noticed that the pots and pans were not damaged. And they thought, I'm sure, that their cast iron pots and pans were breaking, were more brittle, and his were not. So they began to buy his pots and pans, and he did very well. I've read that on his obituary that his sellers, he eventually had people working for him, would continue to throw the pots and pans in the street to demonstrate how sturdy they were. It came to be found out that the iron ore bank that he was using had copper in it, which made an alloy and made the wear stronger. Here's a little bit about a historic coal blast furnace. And I'm certainly not an engineer who understands how these things work, but I know that you need stone to build a furnace stack, water, limestone, which is added to the ore, as you can see there, charcoal, your carbon source, and that comes from trees. I read in a book about Shenandoah National Park that it would take about 1,700 to 1,800 acres of hardwood a year to operate one of these furnaces. So it was really decimating the land around there. And although I don't talk about it in Mr. Shaler's story, it sounds like maybe a one-person operation. It would take labor, and there was enslaved labor working these furnaces in Virginia. There's some good books about it. There were furnaces in the Shenandoah National Park, at least one, and around that area. And there would be a whole furnace complex with housing for the workers as well. Also talk about blacksmithing in the book, because there was the blacksmith shop near the grist mill in Thornton Gap. And here you see a picture of two blacksmiths. One was named Isaac Jefferson, and he was enslaved by Thomas Jefferson. He was working near Monticello, and this is his case photograph around 1845. The other blacksmith shown is a historic interpreter at the Frontier Culture Museum in Stanton, who I took his picture. The blacksmith in the book is named William Booker Thomas. He went by Booker. He's also anachronistic because he also lived in Southwest Virginia, and he lived later than the historic people in the book. But William Booker Thomas was my grandmother's grandfather. And when she was a child, she used to go and stay with her grandparents. And she said that her grandmother, Mrs. Mary Boyd Thomas, was very jealous of Mr. Thomas. And she did not like it when a woman entered the forge by herself. And she would say disparaging things to my grandmother, wondering what that woman wanted, obviously to use blacksmith services. But I thought that was an interesting story. So I included that couple in the book as fictional characters. Another aspect of the book that I wanted to talk about tonight is the Church of the Brethren, an Anabaptist denomination. And Anabaptism is celebrating its 500th year anniversary this year, although the Brethren came about later. They're not 500 years old as a denomination. But this is a picture of the Brethren celebrating the Love Feast. In the book, fictional Nancy's father is a Church of the Brethren minister. I thought that would be fun, so I could talk about the Brethren. In reality, I don't know anything about the historic Nancy Pullum's parents. But here in this love feast, it's a ritual that's been practiced for hundreds of years among the Brethren denominations, and they would share a communal meal, the agape meal or the love feast. Other parts of this larger love feast ceremony were the Eucharist, or communion, prayer and singing, preparation prior to the love feast. And then you can see two brothers in the back exchanging a holy kiss as part of the ceremony, or sometimes a holy hand clasp for friendship. And then foot washing is a part of the love feast. Another way that Anabaptists feature in the book is through these printers, the Christopher Sauer family, and that's Anglicanized as Sauer. But this was a family of German origin that lived in Germantown, Pennsylvania in the 1700s, and they were contemporaries of and competitors with Benjamin Franklin. They printed the first German language Bible, and actually the first Bible in a European language, in 1743 in Germantown, Pennsylvania. And the brethren really liked this Sauer Bible, and they printed some others. They printed one during the Revolutionary War as well, and one later. Christopher Sauer the first was not a member of the Church of the Brethren, but he traveled in those circles, and his son Christopher Sauer II was a member of the Church of the Brethren and was persecuted for his peace stance during the Revolutionary War as a member of the Church of the Brethren. So they printed newspapers, these Bibles. They also printed almanacs. You're seeing an almanac here from the Brethren Historic Library and Archives. This is a later one, and I say later because you can see it's 1780 something, I think 1786. So this would have been printed as a revival of the almanac by Samuel Sauer, I believe. And you can see Hermes flying over what I think is probably the Philadelphia waterfront. His banner changes with the spirit of the times. There's one at Bridgewater College that's near the time of the Revolutionary War, and his banner is saying war and rumors of war. But in addition to printing these things, they printed an herbal healing book. In my book, I say that it was Christopher Sauer the first who printed the botanical healing book, but it was actually Christopher Sauer II. So I'm gonna have to make a little correction in the second printing of this book. Although Christopher Sauer I was trained as a herbalist in Germany, so I'm sure that maybe he helped out on the book. This book has recently been reissued, and you can buy it through Mastoff Press. I bought a copy that was an older copy, and I think I saw that it was recently reissued. It's been translated and edited, but some fascinating cures are in it. So the way that it comes into the story in my book is that the fictional granny woman character, the herbalist, Mrs. Jenkins, gets a hold of a copy of this old book, this old herbal medicine book, but it's in German, so she can't read it. She can't read English either. So Brethren missionaries are visiting her in Thornton Gap, in that area, and she makes tea for them and asks them to read for her from this book. And the character Tempe is also interested in herbal medicine and botany, like the young Victorian lady that she is. I also talk about music in the book. I'm sure a lot of people know about the art of Lewis Miller. This is a painting from 1853 that he did, or a drawing that he did from 1853 near Lynchburg. And talk some about the African-American music traditions and how the character John could have enjoyed those. Also talk about the European style old time music. A song that's featured in the second book is Mole in the Ground. Does anybody know why this song would be featured in the book? It has to do with one of the characters' names. Any guesses? Okay, there's another name for this song is Tempe or Kempe. And Tempe is referenced in one of the verses. So I thought it would be fun for this teenager to go to a party in Thornton Gap and hear this song played and hear her name in the song and how she would react to that. The song is from further south of here, I think, and I'm not sure when it dates to, maybe after the Civil War a little bit. And then I also follow the traditions of telling ghost stories, which are important in the European and the African American traditions. One of the stories told in the book is Wizard Clip. Has anybody been to Middle West Virginia, to that area? I haven't either. I want to make it up there, though. The area is also called Clip, or Wizard Clip, or Priestfield, I've heard. And the story here is that there was this family, the Livingston family, who were living up there in this area when it was part of Virginia. They had a household there, and a man came to stay with them, a stranger. He was traveling, but he became ill. And it became apparent that he was very ill, that he was going to pass away soon. And he asked the family for a priest because he was Roman Catholic. But the Livingston family didn't know any priest, and they weren't going to travel to find him one. So he passed away without his last rites. And after that, strange things began to happen that I read sometimes were described as poltergeist activity, that things began to move in the house, things disappeared, there were noises. But one of the most bothersome things that the supernatural entity, whatever it was, did was to cut holes in their clothing and their tackle. I read it would even cut holes in clothing that people were wearing. And it would like to make clips, these little crescent moon-shaped clips. And I've seen one, which is really neat. I worked at a museum in Southwest Virginia that had a swatch, and I think it said Devil's Clip, but it was the Wizard Clip. And this went on for a number of years and was very bothersome to the family. They tried to get men of faith from different denominations in to help, I guess, exorcise the phenomena. It didn't work. Eventually, they invited priests in, Roman Catholic priests, after Mr. Livingston had a dream of seeing somebody in what he thought was a priestly vestment. And he did go and find some priests, and they blessed the house. The phenomena stopped, but a new phenomenon started, and this was the voice, like this book alludes to the voice. And the voice would instruct the family in being good Roman Catholics. Eventually, the family converted, and they gave land to the Catholic Church. That's why the area is sometimes called Priestfield. And I was very interested to learn recently, while learning more about this legend, that there is still a Catholic center on the property. And they tell the story of Wizard Clip there. But this is one of the more famous ghost stories in early America. It was wrote up in several books. You can see one of the books about it there. It's in anthologies of ghost stories. And I was very interested to read that the Catholic Church also supported this ghost story and said that these were true events that were happening. Something that you can see in the museum that John Heatwell talked about, and he carved a sculpture of the witch doctor out there that has one of these on, is the Satyr Square. And the Satyr Square is the magic square. It's a word square, a palindrome, because you can see that it's saying in Latin satyr around it. And this was found in Pompeii, so it's a very old charm. They're not really sure what it means, but the Latin words translate, and excuse my Latin, as the sower or satyr, arepo, which is a proper name, tends the wheels with care. So this was used as a charm by the Pennsylvania Germans. They use it as a charm in the book. It could be used as a blessing, or it could be used as a cure in the Pennsylvania German tradition. I see it at work. I see it written in old hymn books, old Brethren hymn books, and I've also found it loose as a charm. And this is my favorite photograph in the presentation. Remember where I was saying that this fictional Nancy Pullum in the book, her friend John has disappeared, so she can't ride with him into town, so she gets a mule. So this is like I would imagine her on her mule riding around. This photograph was taken by J.M. Hill. J.M. Hill had a studio in Bridgewater. He photographed a lot of the early Bridgewater College students. He even photographed a young John Whalen, which is pretty neat. This was obviously not made in a studio, though. He also traveled. He traveled up Sumner, West Virginia. So I don't know who this woman is, but she reminded me a lot of this character, Nancy Pullum. And I used the photo. It's the only photo that I used from the collection I work with at the college, and I went through the permission process and the commercial usage agreement and commercial usage fee. And this would be a good time to mention, too, that my books are not a part of my work at Bridgewater College as special collections librarian. They're a separate thing that I do for fun, although the college has been very kind and supportive of me writing. And also that anybody can come and use the special collections materials at Bridgewater College, including John Whalen's papers. I do ask that people make an appointment because often I'm the only person there and the materials are behind the scenes, so I have to do a pull, and that's nice to do that in advance. But look at our website and let me know if you would like to come and visit and use the materials. So thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?
Do they know the location of the Thornton Gap mill where it was?
I think so. The question is, do they know the location of the Thornton Gap mill or where it was? I read about the mill in Shenandoah Secrets, which and they say, I think they said that it was near today's town of Sperryville.
Oh, okay. It was across.
Yeah, that's what they said in the Thornton Gap. It was on the river, and it said it later became part of a toll road that Peter Mayer built from Culpeper Courthouse. Other questions? Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned that the Bower House, there's still some ruins.
Yes.
That other map, the map that you had shown at the beginning,
Yes.
is there any other remains of anything else that are identifiable? You know?
That's a good question. I haven't been up there because you have to bushwhack to get there. And I've heard the Hosberg house, the Barbie family ancestral home, is gone. I think that was destroyed. Well, I know it was destroyed when they built the Lee Highway through the area. When I was watching one of the videos about somebody bushwhacking into this area, he found other structures. And I was really excited because I thought, oh, what if that's Nancy's cabin? What if that's John's cabin? But I don't know. Other questions? Okay, well, thank you all for coming out, and be happy to sign books. They have them for sale here in the Welcome Center, and appreciate everybody watching the presentation and Rocktown History for hosting. You're welcome.
All right. To the Luray Valley Museum and schedule a visit with Rod Graves because he would be more than happy to give you a tour. And he gave a presentation on blast furnaces. So I know he could give you a lesson on that as well if you were interested. What I want to know is how you got your AI done. So we can talk about that later. But are you planning to take your amazing portrait of Rattlesnake Granny, frame it, put it in your house? All right. Anybody who needs a gift idea for Stephanie, see if you can get your hands on that image. Thank you. That is so remarkable. Just all that history, and I just love the way that you can piece it together. I don't know if anybody else in here is a writer. I don't think I am. So, oh yes, of course you are. Yes, yes, yes. Are you planning to go into historical fiction? Okay, yeah, well, all right. So I don't know about anybody else writing fiction, but that was great. Thank you for sharing all of your backgrounds, and thank you everybody for coming. I hope you'll come back for another program, and thanks to everybody out in YouTube land. Hope to see you back also. Good night.